Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Eternal Top Decks. After we've updated some world decks recently, it's time to finally dive into the first proper post-Defiance deck tag of a deck that wasn't an archetype before and is a new one thanks to Defiance in Ixtun Peaks. Yesterday I played the Eye of Winter Classic 3 and top 8'd with my version of it, and I really like the deck and the list that I played, so it's time to share it with you guys and take it to battle and ranked a bit. Before we move on to the deck, please, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to not miss out on future content, and if you want to keep the free content going and want to support us, please consider at least whitelisting EternalTitans.com and YouTube on your ad block to support the free content with ads. That really helps a lot. Thanks, and on to the deck tag. Okay, so this is the deck. This is the exact list that I played. This deck might look like a control deck to a lot of people, but it actually is not a control deck. It's more of an aggro control deck actually, and plays out that way, or should be played this way. And I think that's part of where its strength comes from, and I've been really impressed with the deck. And yeah, it felt really strong and dominant in the games that I played. I lost one close match before the top 8 against a deck that I also beat easily 2-0 in another match, and felt very strong throughout the tournament. And yeah, felt like I was playing a superior game than most of my opponents. Mind you, most of my opponents still played Howling Peak decks, but yeah, worse Howling Peak decks in my opinion. Compared to how this deck felt. Alright, let's take a look at the card choices. Or before we do, actually this deck is inspired by like the Ixtun Herald deck that MrNoTimeMan recently wrote about. I quite liked the core idea and direction he took, and it was like the best looking yeah, deck that I have seen since the release of the set, compared to a lot of the other messy piles that I've seen around and really didn't like. But I still disliked a fair share of the choices he made with the deck, but want to give a shout out to him here for coming up with this really cool direction and shell for Howling Peak, and I feel like right now this is the best home for Howling Peak. And I'll go over my version of this and where it differentiates from his. It's a fair share, I think, actually, and also plays out a bit different, I think, than his. But yeah, I think I would not have built this version without him writing about his version that he hit rank 1 with after going 36 in games from rank 2 to rank 1. Alright, so first off, we have the units: 8 merchants, 4 Jotun Hurler, 3 Westwind Herald with the force in the market, and 4 Rizahn. So the merchants are kind of a multi-purpose thing here. They give you more consistency by providing you with additional Howling Peaks and Westwind Heralds, which is a pretty big deal. You effectively have virtually 11 Howling Peaks, so you basically always have the first Howling Peak, which is massive, and you have 7 Westwind Herald, which is also quite relevant since the deck has kind of like the backup combo game when it's like stalled out or might be threatened to overwhelm. You can always just kind of lock out the game hard by comboing with Westwind Herald, the mirror image from Howling Peak, and Scattershot. And yeah, Howling Peak is just a powerful engine that at the same time kind of provides you with the pieces to go off with the one Scattershot in the market, where you virtually have 4 of thanks to Ixtun Merchant. And you also have 7 Westwind Heralds, and Westwind Herald also happens to be a pretty good threat on its own. It doesn't die to Avigraft. It is an Aegis threat, which is very powerful in Eternal. Sure, there are decks with Vara in it where this is not as good, but most of the time this is a pretty good threat. The deck is very good at making it connect, and it's also pretty hard to kill. And it's a great target to copy with Mirror Image. Even without Scattershot, just making another Herald each turn will eventually beat the opponent. Okay, then we have 4 Jotun Hurler. MrNoTimeMan only had 3, and he had 3 Xos, or Show, or whatever you he's pronounced. My Chinese is not really there. The thing is, I think Show is a bit of a trap. It's just basically a worse Jotun Hurler in my opinion, since the card is mainly in here to be 2 cards in 1 to feed these 8 merchants and these 4 Strategize. So if you do that, it doesn't matter whether it's a Treasure Trove and a Show or a Jotun Hurler and a Snowball. And if you're not doing that, both parts of Jotun Hurler are actually better in the deck. First of all, the deck doesn't really have a 5-drop other than Westwind Herald, so a fair share of the time I found myself just dropping a Jotun Hurler on turn 5, especially when I'm the aggressor, dropping a turn 5 Jotun Hurler to just start pressuring my opponent more and attacking and lowering the health total to a point where I can just kind of burn them out with Rizahns and Torches and Peaks and Herald, recasting that stuff. And even against like aggressive decks with smaller units, just dropping a 5-cost 4/4 that can block every single of the one of the units without dying, and often even without jumping, or often even without trading, is pretty good. And 5 is significantly less than 7, as you can imagine. So and Snowball is a much better card than Treasure Trove if you care about the card. Paying 2 to cycle Treasure Trove is very slow and very marginal, so it's not really better than just sticking it into a merchant or a Strategize. So you don't really get much upside when you're not doing one of these things, and you're wasting a lot of tempo. While Snowball, when you want it as a card, is actually amazing. It costs 1, very cheap, it kills a lot of things. There are a lot of good 1-health units in the game. Initiate, Trailmaker, Hoyan, Resolute Monk, Oni Ronins and other 1-drops. There's a lot of things. Also, the deck has a lot of damage-based stuff. Rizahn, Torch, Howling, Peaks, Gundown, that can be combined with the Snowball to kill stuff. Like a fair share of the time I ended up Howling Peak, Gundown plus Snowball to kill a 6-health unit, which is actually pretty common because there's a lot of 6-health units like Titans and Varas and Out of the Vaults and that sort of stuff that Gundown cannot kill, but thanks to Snowball, you can. Also, having more 1-cost removal early on to kill these early drops that I mentioned is super powerful. Then the other thing is, Aegis is very powerful, as I mentioned, and the deck has its issues with Aegis. Having 4 sort of free cards to break an Aegis is very vital because there are a lot of Westwind Heralds, Yennev Merchants, Jotun Feast Callers and that sort of stuff that you really want to be able to deal with without throwing away 2 removal and then losing to the next threat because you don't have a removal anymore. So yeah, Jotun Hurler has been all around amazing, and Show is just too slow and clunky for what this deck wants to do, I think. And I'd rather have something like Rizahn in the deck, which is cheaper and also a 2-for-1, but a much more power efficient one, and also adds lifesteal to the deck, but I'll talk about Rizahn in a moment. So yeah, I felt like 4 Hurler is the right number. Having 4 effects for the 8 merchants and 4 Strategize is good, because it doesn't dilute your deck too much with cards that are just 2 blanks that you mostly stick into your market or shuffle away with your Strategize. And also, yeah, you just can do the whole putting a Hurler in the market and then getting it back to get more virtual extra cards, and having a cheap spell to make sure Rizahn has lifesteal by the time he rolls around is also good. Then we have the 3 Westwind Herald. just nice synergy with Howling Peaks. Thanks to the free mirror image, you can just make a Westwind Herald each turn or get the scatter shot and make a full board of Westwind Heralds in one turn while dealing 1 damage to your opponent every time you do. That usually burns out the opponent. To be fair, I have not done that a single time in the tournament, and by now believe that it probably doesn't belong and is kind of unnecessary, and the market slot could be used better, because right now the Ixtun Merchant is a bit weak. I'll talk about the market in a moment. The Ixtun Merchant is a bit weak in terms of what he can get, so improving that would be a nice upgrade to the deck. And then we have Rizahn. Yeah, I just wanted like a bit more impact. Rizahn is just a very good card. Adding lifesteal to the deck is really, really good the way it plays. Rizahn is great offensively and defensively. It's a 2-for-1. Usually it's great with Howling Peak because copying it is brutal. Playing it as a 5-7 with Peak out is also very good because it takes away some of the potential avenues that people kill it, like Auric Runehammer and that sort of stuff, and also makes it really good at blocking, which normally it isn't. Normally, a lot of the time, it only can trade block. Now with Howling Peak, the opponent can basically not attack if they don't have an answer, and then next turn they start losing to an attacking Rizahn. The 3 damage is very good here. It's removal, it is pressure. I killed a fair share of people with just Rizahning their face a bunch. It kills relic weapons, it helps you finish off opposing sides, be it Howling Peak or even single-handedly killing the other sides on its own. Card is just one of the best units in the game, and there's no reason not to play it when you're in the colors. And I've been super happy with it and felt like it made the deck a lot better having it in there. So yeah, Rizahn just being a lot better than Show. I think I don't really want to play Show usually. Show it doesn't die to Avigraft, it only dies to like Vanquish, but so does Rizahn, and Rizahn also is a 2-for-1. For 6 power you get a 5-4 lifesteal flying and kill something, while with Show you pay 7 power and get a 6-6 flyer, no lifesteal, and then you have to pay another 2 to draw a card, so it's like a 9 cost 6-6 flyer that draws your card effectively, which is a pretty bad rate. Sure, there are the synergies with the merchants and Strategize and so on, but yeah, overall I feel like the card is not worth it. I think the card is only good in like dedicated grindy control decks, like the deck that LSV played on stream a while ago, like the Winchester deck. It makes a lot of sense there also because you don't have access to Jotun Hurler, but I think in this deck Hurler is so much better, and 4 Hurler is all that I want to commit to this. I just don't want Show in my deck. Yeah, then I want to talk about the market before we move on to the other cards. Basically, we have the 1 Howling Peak, the 1 Herald for the blue merchants, the Scatter Shot for the red merchants, which at this point I would probably consider cutting or something else. Then I added 1 Hailstorm to the market. I don't like Hailstorm in the main deck. I'll talk about that when I talk about the removal suit. But yeah, so I have 1 here just to have access to it in the rare cases where it's really good or really needed, mainly against like something like Praxis tokens. Against most other decks I don't really need it. There will sometimes be random situations where it comes up and then you can get it, but it's mainly here to not lose to like armies in a can type stuff, go wide, where regular removal cannot realistically stabilize you. While against today's aggressive decks, you can just fight them with normal spot removal and units well enough that you don't need to put a situational card like Hailstorm in your deck. And then the removal that you have will be much more universal and better against other decks. And then I have Caleb's Choice, another card that both merchants can fetch. I've been very happy with this. A lot of the time, if your opponent hits one of your merchants, the other one can still, like with Avigraft, the other merchant can still technically get Caleb's Choice and kill the Avigraft if you need to. But honestly, a lot of the time, if they kill one of my merchants after I used it, it's not that big of a deal. The market is not super important after the first market shopping basically, and you still have like the 4 other merchants to just trade away even the merchant that is locked, or strategize it away and access your market. So I have not, like, sure, if they hit the NF merchant, it's a bigger deal than Ixtun, but it's also not that easy to Avigraft the NF. So if they just Avigraft my Ixtun merchant, it's kind of whatever to me, honestly. Which is also why I don't have Boar in the main. I get the synergies and all, and it's kind of neat, but I think the card is still too situational. And sure, you have the merchants and the strategize to get rid of it and all, but deck space is precious. I rather have cards in my deck that help me more often than this Boar that I half the time have to just shuffle away because it doesn't do anything, and then I have this Boar in my hand when I needed something that helps me not lose or win in this situation. So sure, there's a bunch of random targets and there's Avigraft, which makes it nice, but it has never seemed critical to me. I rarely cared about relics with this deck. There's also not that many relics, and yeah, Avigraft is not that big of a deal. And I have the one market option that both merchants can access. MrNoTimeMan had Boar in the main, because if he had it in the market and the opponent Avigrafts the Ixtun merchant, he can never access relic removal. Boar is a strong card, but it's not that important or necessary right now, and having the singleton relic removal in Caleb's choice has been doing well enough for me that I didn't Boar. And it being a card that both merchants can access, and also being a counter, and being fast. Like, I sometimes blew out people in combat by killing an Avigraft or end of turn killing an urn that the opponent played early to make sure my Aegis units don't have Aegis and he can much easier fight them, which came up in the tournament, for example. Or it's just great at protecting stuff, countering key spells like harsh rules and stuff like that. So yeah, this market slot has been very well worth it. Hailstorm didn't come up in the tournament, but I think it's still worthwhile having the effect, having access to the effect, because when you need it, it's the only card that can save you. So having it somewhere in your AD to get in situations where you otherwise might lose seems worth the slot to me. But yeah, Scattershot is the card that I would probably consider replacing. Maybe it could be cut for a Rizahn that would make the Ixtun merchant a bit stronger, a bit more universal. Since, yeah, I believe at this point that having the combo is not really worth it. And I could even see trying to replace Westwind Herald with something else. But Westwind Herald has been good. I just feel like the Scattershot just has been basically a waste of a market slot at this point. It's cute and cool to have the combo, but the way the deck plays out, you just can win well enough, usually, without comboing. You have the Rizahns, the Heralds, the Peak Herald combo itself, just making another Herald each turn, usually was enough to secure games. The deck just generates so much advantage and has so much utility that it never comes to a point where you actually need to Scattershot combo to win a game that you otherwise wouldn't. Okay, on to the other cards. The removal suit is 4 Avigraft, 2 Defiance, 4 Torch, and 4 Vanquish. I do not run any Hailstorm or Harsh Rule. Harsh Rule is just not really what the deck wants. The deck is more proactive, it's more of an aggro control deck. You want cheap, tempo efficient answers that deal with everything you need to deal with without setting your own board back, because you might be pressuring with a couple of merchants or a herald or even a hurler. So Harsh Rule not that great. Also, Harsh Rule is not very well positioned right now. There's a lot of Aegis, and also there aren't that many units. A lot of the decks are only like running minor amounts of units, so that you can basically already be happy if you get like a 2-for-1 out of a Harsh Rule, and then you also have to hope you don't have a unit out to not turn it into like a 2-for-2 or whatever. Harsh Rule just is pretty poorly positioned right now, and also a pretty poor fit for this type of deck. In like a dedicated control deck, I would still run Harsh Rule. You kind of need it in these decks to catch up from behind, and also an additional way to generate card advantage, and you also don't have a board usually. So it's, if they have 2 units, it's a guaranteed 2-for-1 because you won't have a unit out. But yeah, in this deck, I just don't like it, and I never missed it. Similar thing for Hailstorm. I think the problem with Hailstorm is the card is either a 10 or it's garbage, basically. Like, the card is very bad if you use it as a non-fast 3-cost torch, effectively. That maybe also breaks an Aegis. Just very clunky, very inefficient. Like, for 3 I can play an Avigraft that just straight up kills anything that I want to kill that doesn't have flying, and even locks them out of their other copies until they deal with the Avigraft. So yeah, did not miss Hailstorm at all. I also think Hailstorm is not very well positioned. The primary aggro deck right now seems to be Rakano. They are not that fast, they are not that low curve, they don't go like 1-drop into double 1-drop, where Hailstorm actually shines. They at best go like 1-2-3, and against like 1-2-3, first of all, I don't want to take the like 4 damage from their 1-drop and give them like the 2 war cries that they often would get when I'm on the draw in those situations. So either I take a lot of damage and give them war cries before I Hailstorm, or I kill the 1-drop and make Hailstorm less efficient, and so on. And that's already like considering the ideal scenario of them going 1-2-3 and going 1-2-3 with a 1-2-3 that all 3 die to Hailstorm, because aggro decks have to keep Hailstorm in mind. The fact that the card exists alone means that you have to build your deck and play in a way that you don't lose to it, and then not having it in your deck is much, much better, because the card will be very bad in a lot of situations. And I think the only kind of deck that actively justifies playing Hailstorm, in my opinion, is something like Praxis Tokens or the old Jitto aggro deck that reliably went like 1-drop into double 1-drop and also had Granite and Drones and assembly lines, so basically had cards that created multiple bodies with one card that were really good against spot removal. But since that's not the case, I'd rather control my opponent's early game with cheap, efficient 1-for-1 answers like Snowball, Torch, Defiance, and that sort of stuff, than having the clunky 3-cost Hailstorm that the opponent can play around and kind of make awkward for me if they build the deck properly and play well and so on. And then it's also kind of bad against a lot of other decks. I just feel like most of the time Hailstorm will make your deck worse rather than better. So try to build your deck without Hailstorm, or make it work without Hailstorm, and then your deck is going to be lower curve and more flexible as a result. Unless, like I said, there is a predominant go wide deck like Jitto or Praxis Tokens, for example, then you might need it, but right now that's not really the case. So I have one Hailstorm in the market for the situations where I need it after all, but they are few and far between. In the tournament, there were not really any. I played against the Skycrake burn deck where Hailstorm is kind of good. That's like the one matchup where I think I marketed for it once, but the thing is, you can't really afford to take a lot of damage till turn 3 from their stuff, so you still need to kill their stuff, and then the point removal still was better. And even the one game I think that I marketed for Hailstorm, I ended up not casting it because it was better to play blockers, not blowing up my merchant or merchants with the Hailstorm and containing their board with spot removal, because setting up Hailstorm means you take a lot of damage, and that's exactly what they want, and then you lose, even though you have Hailstorm. And then we have the Fatty removal or Avigraft for Vanquish. This is exactly the kind of deck that wants Avigraft, because you don't have access to something like Slay. In the past, your only Fatty removal was Vanquish and sort of Permafrost and or Eileen's Choice, but they both have a bunch of potential issues, and Avigraft is doing a pretty good job at just making a poor man's Slay impression, and sometimes the lockout ability also comes in handy against decks where you can hit their like a critical unit that they depend on, for example. Keep in mind, Face Aegis stops this. Another reason why having 4 Hurler is very good, because Snowball can break Face Aegis, so you can Avigraft them, which came up a couple times in the tournament. 2 Defiance, I started on 4 Defiance actually, because the card is amazing. The thing is just the format right now shapes up in a way that Defiance doesn't have very many good targets. Like most of the decks that I played, other than the Skycrake burn deck, Defiance was basically actively bad, because all they had was like a few 3-drops, usually Yennefer Merchant. So Defiancing that, not very good. Sure, you can snowball and then Defiance, but you rather just trade with your own merchants. That's much more resource efficient. So I just ended up marketing or shuffling it away every time. And I could see cutting them for now until the format changes and playing something else over them. Not sure what. Maybe Permafrost, because Permafrost at least is proactive, deals with blockers, and also works on more cards than Defiance, since all the good Defiance targets seemed pretty rare at the moment, because everyone is on these mid-rangey Peaks merchant decks where the earliest drops are like merchants, and a lot of the time it's Yennefer Merchant. But all in all, this card is amazing, and especially on ladder you will need it more than I did in the tournament, because there's a lot of Rakano, and against Rakano Defiance is great. It even kills like their sharpshooters with weapons and stuff on it, or like the Thing Day sharpshooter that is really big, and you just kill it for 1. Even though it had charge with thanks to Warhelm, and you just kill it before it even does anything. Amazing card. It's also so good because it's so cheap and it's fast. So you can do multiple things, like sometimes you can deploy a Herald with Defiance backup, or even a Howling Peak on 7 with Defiance backup, even if it only stuns a bigger unit that is trying to kill your Peak. Is great because it lets you set up your Peak and protect it. When the card is good, it's amazing, but right now it's not good that often, unfortunately. So after the tournament, at least for another tournament, I would consider cutting them for something more useful. On ladder, you probably want to keep at least the 2. And yeah, for Torch, not much explanation needed. Great removal, one of the best cards in the game, best fire card. Also teams up well with Rizahn, Snowball, or Gundown from Howling Peak. And yeah, then we have for Strategize and for Wisdom, card draw, and digging. I mean, this is sort of card advantage thanks to Hurler sometimes, and it also just is virtual card advantage by getting rid of situational cards, spare power, and helping you find the cards you need. This is effectively just a better show, because show basically also cycles. I mean, Strategize effectively cycles, but it cycles 2 cards itself and a card of your choice, while show cycles only the treasure trove, but not show itself. But show has the upside of kind of being card advantage, but if I had the choice, I'd rather have Strategize in my deck because it's more efficient and synergizes better with what is going on than show. But Strategize and show are surprisingly comparable in a way. But yeah, I still think Strategize is better, and like I said, I am not a big fan of show in this deck because the 7-cost dragon is not something that I care for or ever really wanted in my games, and the trove is a worse Strategize. Getting 2 cards deep right away and getting rid of a useless card ends up benefiting me more than getting 1 card deep and having a free 7-cost 6/6 flyer in my hand. So yeah, Strategize, no show. And Wisdom of the Elders, not much explanation needed. The bread and butter of the deck, helps you hit your power drops, find your answers, stay ahead on cards to your opponent or on par, depending. Just a very important Primal tool. And then last but not least, we have obviously Howling Peak, the heart of the deck, the sort of Channel the Tempest of these decks. It serves the same purpose. It's sort of like a 3-for-1 or 4-for-1 rather. You get like 3.5 cards out of this for 1 card, and also get a lot of power for free. It's just the kind of card that ends the game, puts you ahead enough to win, and synergizes really well with the rest of the deck. And then we have the power base. Noteworthy is I don't have a power in the market. I don't like that very much. I don't want to have to aggressively market for power. I rather want to aggressively market away either Hurler parts or spare power, so that I am not forced to play a merchant to make sure I hit a power drop, when in reality I rather need to or want to play something else like a removal or even wisdom instead. But I can't play wisdom because if I don't hit power, I miss a power drop, which is devastating. But I kinda like wanna draw deeper into my deck to get answers for threats that are already in play or that are coming up soon. MrNoTimeMan had 29 power, which I think is way too low. I have 25 plus 6 for cargo and 2 seek. I'll talk about that in a moment. And that might still be 1 too low. I might want 1 additional seek power, or maybe at least shave 1 cargo for 1 power. But maybe it should be 32 power. The deck just does really well with power. You have Strategize, you have 8 merchants to get rid of it. You have amazing 6 drops, you have a lot of card advantage. So drawing a power too much is hardly an issue. Drawing a power too few is devastating. I ended up losing the quarterfinals to a Ixtun Peak deck that was super greedy. It had like 25 power plus 4, even had 4 7 drops with the same amount of 6 drops that I have, and the same amount of card draw that I have, but he just kinda casually, lucky as they go, played power to like 6 or 7 each game easily, and I, with my 2 power more and my lower curve, stumbled in all 3 games, basically being stuck on 3 or 4 power, while he had 6 or 7, basically every game, and that's how I lost. Sure, the matchup would have been a tough one regardless, but I have no chance of beating a challenging matchup if I draw power like that, and it was really frustrating, especially because I had even more power than him, constantly drew less, had a lower curve, so I'm even better at working with less power, and so on. But yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, these 3 games and the ratio at which it happened, and it also came up before, made me consider wanting a 30-second power, or at least increasing the chances of top decking power a bit in the situations where you're having these rough power draws, because technically I think it should be enough, like 31 plus the card draw should be enough to get you to 6 reasonably often, but maybe the deck just needs 6 so much that you should run 32. Honestly, in a 32 power deck, you normally run 30. In a deck that wants like to hit 6 this much and has like 7 6 drops or even more, because you have the merchants for the peak, so you have like a 6 drop on turn 6 every time, 100% of the time. 31 power is greedy, even with wisdom and strategize, so I would consider finding for another seek to go up to 32. The deck really can take it very well, and I did not lose because I drew too much power. I only lost because I got stuck on power a bunch of times. I could see shaving a cargo for a seek, like I said. I think the fact that cargo is an unreliable power source, is vastly overstated, because in the end it's up to you. You can mostly control your influence and develop your influence in a way that you do not transform cargo. And for example, you can always delay your second fire a lot of the time, because you only need it on 6 anyway. And yeah, I did not lose games or got into power screw situations because cargo was not a power. Like, I barely ever were in a scenario where I wanted to draw power, drew cargo, and cargo was already transformed. There were scenarios, however, where I deliberately delayed my second fire influence, for example, to not transform cargos yet, because I would want to draw more power. But that's something to just keep an eye on, and I think that's another reason to consider going to 32 power, because you have these 4 cargos that turn into business, further preventing you from flooding. And in this style of deck, you will usually find a card among the 3 cards of the contraband that is useful and impactful to you, making this mostly a real card. So yeah, I think having the card in the deck really great. I don't get why people don't want to run these cargoes. You just gotta yeah, manage them properly, and then they are amazing. They also allow you to effectively play your power more than you normally would without any downside. So yeah, going forward, probably try to fit another Seek power, because I only lost basically because I was stuck on power the entire tournament. Otherwise, if I have like power draws and hit my influence and my power till turn 6, I usually just ended up winning and was able to like outcard and outmaneuver my opponent and overwhelm them. Also, adding another Seek also significantly increases the influence stability in the deck further. While the influence is pretty good, adding another source of each color would definitely make it a bit better, because it can be a bit at the low end still sometimes. And yeah, then we have the power base, 10 ready power sources, 3 Cobalt Waystone, bunch of sigils. I usually like having at least 3 fire sigils in peak decks for Caleb's favor. Keep in mind, try to avoid fetching fire sigils unless you absolutely need to because of peak. And if you have fire sigils in your hand that you don't need for influence, you might want to consider strategizing them to the bottom for peak and play a different power source. And then we have 10 crests. I really like the 10 crests in these 3 faction decks that are kind of slow but not super controlling. Like for example, LSV also had 10. The super controlling decks that have less units and are less proactive, I like the 12, but 10 seems like a good number in this. And then we just have a couple of seats here to round this out. The influence count I think right now is at 18 fire, 19 justice, and 21 primal. I want the 21 primal for early wisdoms to use my power and draw into my stuff. And then the 19 justice for Avigraft. I wouldn't mind another justice for Avigraft, but it's rarely a turn 3 play, so if and by turn 4 or 5 you're fine with just 19 justice usually. And yeah, I had 17 fire for a while, and I kept getting hands with no fire or being stuck on one fire way too long with Rizahns and peaks. And given how consistently the deck gets to 6 and has a 6 drop that costs double fire, you absolutely need to have the 6th fire by the time you have 6 power. And not being able to cast Rizahn or Peak, which are your most impactful cards, is super backbreaking. So that's why I went up to 18, and since then it feels much better and much smoother. But yeah, adding another Seek would bring it to 22, 20, and 19, which is yeah, pretty safe and smooth, and I would really like that. And yeah, 5 seats. I could see shaving 1 or 2 of these for banners, because the deck has a fair share of units, some of them with Aegis, and the Rakano duel is the one best suited for banner, I think, since it's the Rizahn color and that's the influence combination you need the latest. You don't really want to turn Primal sources into banners, because Primal is what you need early for Wisdom and Hailstorm. So yeah, shaving 1 or 2 of these for banners might make the power run a little smoother and give you a couple more ready top deck power outs, because if you need to top deck power, seats are always depleted. Okay, this was a really long deck tech, but I think it was well worth going into this much detail. Hope you guys like the list. I'm very happy with the deck. I would play it again, would probably make some of the changes that I mentioned and tweak it a little more. But yeah, deck felt really powerful, and I was very happy with it. As usual, before we're gonna hop into some games, make sure to hit the subscribe button and like the video if you enjoy it. Yeah, time to play some games in Ranked. I'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.